Has someone ever tried to make you feel guilty for choosing yourself?
He looked straight at me across the table, like I was some stranger who'd wandered in off the street and sat down with the family, and with that old, tired smirk he always used when he was trying to sound like the man of the house, he said, "We're done carrying you." Just like that. Right in the middle of Christmas dinner, with mashed potatoes still steaming, and my sister's husband chewing turkey like it was just any other moment. The room fell so silent you could have heard the tick of the thermostat flipping on. Mom froze, eyes down on her plate, and Lindsay's kids just stared, forks suspended in midair, unsure whether this was a joke or a lesson. I knew what it was. It was war. Only difference was I didn't fight back. I just breathed in, slow and deep, blinked twice, and stood up. It's not like this was some random outburst. No, this had been simmering for years under a fake sense of harmony. I'd learned to live with little digs like, "When are you getting your act together?" or "Not everyone can be the golden child," always tossed in under the guise of a joke. But that night, Christmas night, Dawn, because calling him Dad stopped feeling natural long ago, decided to make it public. Like it was a courtroom, and I was being sentenced in front of the jury. I wasn't jobless. I wasn't irresponsible. I wasn't living in their basement eating Hot Pockets and playing video games. I had my own life, my own apartment, a steady freelance gig that paid decent. But yeah, I'd moved back home for a stretch 3 years ago after the divorce, after everything fell apart with Marcus, and I had nowhere else to go. I paid rent, more than Lindsay ever paid when she lived at home, and I cooked most nights and covered things they didn't even know about, like the oil bill that winter Dawn forgot to pay, or the cell phone plan I quietly rolled into mine when Mom's kept getting shut off. But none of that mattered, apparently. Because the version of me Dawn saw was stuck in 2011, the year I came home crying with 2 suitcases and nothing else. In his eyes, I was still the failure, still the one they had to support, even though I hadn't taken a dime from them in over 2 years. What he really meant by carrying was emotional weight. I was the sounding board for every one of their fights. I was the only one who remembered to refill Mom's medication when she forgot. I was the one who kept track of Lindsay's kids' birthdays, because Lord knows she was too busy Instagramming her way through motherhood to remember that her son likes dinosaurs, not superheroes. I was the glue, but they never saw it that way. And when glue holds too long, people forget it's even there. That night, as I stood from the table, I scanned every face. My mom wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared at her cranberry sauce like it could explain something to her. Lindsay looked confused, not guilty, just confused, like she wasn't sure what this had to do with her. Her husband kept chewing, clearly relieved that whatever drama was happening didn't involve him. The kids had already lost interest and were fighting over roles. I didn't say a word. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw a glass or slam a door. I just reached for my coat, grabbed my car keys off the hook by the stairs, and walked out into the cold without looking back. And the craziest part? No one followed. Not even Mom. Not even to ask if I was okay. That silence was louder than anything Dawn had said. I sat in my car for a few minutes before turning the key. My breath was fogging up the windshield, my fingers shaking a little, not from cold, but from the sudden clarity of it all. I realized I'd been waiting for this. Not just tonight. For years. I'd been waiting for someone in that house to finally say out loud what they all believed deep down, that I was the burden, that they were the saviors, and that I should be grateful for being allowed to orbit their little world. And now that they had, I was free. As I pulled out of the driveway, I drove past the hedges I helped Dad trim every summer and the broken porch light I paid to fix last spring because he kept saying he'd get to it but never did. I passed the mailbox where their overdue utility bills used to stack up before I started having them sent to me so I could just pay the damn things and spare the house another shut-off notice. I thought about how I still had all their login info for the water, electric, gas, car insurance, and even Mom's prescription plan. Because when you've been doing everything quietly, invisibly, for so long, you end up being the only one who actually knows how anything works. And right there, while I was stopped at the red light at the end of the street, the first idea crept into my head, not out of anger, not even spite, but just this quiet, sober awareness that I didn't owe them a damn thing anymore. Not a dime. Not a reminder. Not even a Merry Christmas. I could turn off every switch I had flipped on for them and let them sit in the dark and figure out who, exactly, had been carrying who. You ever get to that point with someone where you stop trying to explain yourself? Where the only thing left to say is nothing at all. That was me in that moment. Done explaining. Done trying to be the good daughter. And done keeping their world turning behind the scenes while they sat at their decorated table judging mine. And here's what I want to ask you, because maybe you've been in my shoes. If you were the one holding your family together from behind the curtain, doing it all without applause or even basic recognition, and they suddenly stood up and called you a burden, would you stay? Would you keep pretending? Or would you, like me, walk out into the cold and finally stop holding the damn curtain? Because I didn't just walk out of a house that night. I walked out of a role I never auditioned for. And the funny thing about walking away? You start seeing just how much you were holding up. And how fast it all starts to fall when you're not there. Next? Well, let's just say I didn't leave empty-handed. When people talk about family, especially around the holidays, they like to paint it in soft colors, warm fireplaces, laughter echoing down hallways, shared traditions that make time feel like it's standing still. But the truth is, for some of us, family is more like a job we never applied for, one with no pay, no thanks, and no time off, and if you say anything about how tired you are, they look at you like you're ungrateful for even being included. That's what it had become for me. It wasn't love. It was obligation with a bow on top. And the more I thought about it after walking out of that house on Christmas night, the more I realized just how deep that obligation had been running, and how much I had been giving without anyone ever truly knowing, not because I was hiding it, but because they never thought to ask. You see, it started small. Back when I moved in after the divorce, Don, my father, though the title never fit quite right, was already semi-retired and always complaining about how expensive everything was getting. He'd act like I was a guest, but remind me every other week how this house doesn't pay for itself, even though I was already transferring money into their checking account every month, not just for my room, but because I didn't want to feel like a parasite, didn't want them to think I was one of those adult children clinging to the nest. The truth was, Lindsay never paid a dime when she lived there for 2 years after college. And when she moved out, they threw her a barbecue. When I moved in, they gave me a payment schedule. I remember the first bill I paid without telling anyone. It was the electric. The lights had flickered a few times in early winter, and I asked Don if he'd paid it, and he barked something about not needing to be micromanaged in my own house. So I logged in with the info he'd left on a post-it near the desktop and saw the notice, past due by 3 weeks. I paid it. $174. Not because I wanted thanks, but because I didn't want Mom coming down the stairs in the dark if they shut it off in the middle of the night. After that, I figured it was easier to just monitor the accounts myself. Over time, that turned into the water bill, then the heating oil, then the cable, and even the damn garbage pickup. Every time I'd check, there was something overdue, something ignored, something Don had meant to get to, but forgot or maybe just didn't want to face. And don't get me started on the car insurance. When their old Honda got sideswiped in the Walmart parking lot, they told me it would cost too much to fix because the deductible was high. I found out why. They'd been missing payments, and their policy was in danger of being suspended. So I added their account to my monthly autopay. $79 every 4 weeks, without fail, for almost 2 years. And that wasn't even the half of it. There were other things, softer things, things that didn't show up on a spreadsheet. Like the time Mom ran out of her thyroid medication and said she'd just wait until January when the insurance reset, and I went behind her back, called the pharmacy, and paid out of pocket so she wouldn't risk her health trying to save $20. Or how, when Don's blood pressure started spiking, I sat with him on the phone for hours arguing with the insurance rep, trying to get him a doctor who took his plan, because he'd been putting it off for months and didn't want to deal with all the damn robots. None of them ever asked me to do these things, but none of them stopped me either. And after a while, they just expected it. If something got fixed, they assumed it was because it worked itself out. If a service was never shut off, they assumed Don had paid it just in time. No one thought to say, "Hey, Rachel, were you the one who handled that?" And maybe that's on me. Maybe I trained them too well to believe I'd always just take care of things. But somewhere along the way, I became invisible. Not just in the house, but in the math, in the calendar, in the very infrastructure of their daily lives. And let's talk about Lindsay, the sister with the Pinterest-perfect life. The one who calls mom when she's bored in traffic, or shows up once a month with grocery store flowers and takes 1,000 photos to post about how grateful she is for family. She didn't know half of what was happening. She'd come in, throw compliments like sprinkles, hug everyone on her way out, and never once asked how the bills were getting paid or whether mom's doctor's appointments were being kept. But if I'd dropped the ball even once, she would have heard about it immediately. That's the thing about being the one who always catches everything, you only get noticed when you don't. After I left that night, I sat in my apartment and made a list, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. I went through every account I had linked: Verizon, PPL Electric, Aqua, State Farm, Walgreens AutoRx, even the security system that Don insisted was a scam until someone broke into their neighbor's garage and he changed his mind. I had access to all of it. I had saved their passwords, set up reminders, automated the payments, and buried my name in the background so they could keep believing they were doing just fine without help. And for the first time in a long time, I thought, what if I stopped? It didn't feel like revenge. Not at first. It felt like waking up. Like opening your eyes underwater and finally realizing how long you've been holding your breath. I wasn't looking to punish anyone. I was just done. Done keeping everything upright while being told I was dragging everyone down. Done pretending that carrying the load meant I had no worth. Done being the ghost in the system. So I started. That night. Quietly. One account at a time. One password reset after another. I didn't delete anything. I just disconnected. Removed my payment methods. Cleared my information. Reset the billing preferences. I left everything intact, just unpaid. I knew it would take about 2 to 3 weeks before things started slipping. And when they did, they'd have no idea why. They'd blame the company. Blame each other. They might even think it was some error or fraud. But not once, at least not right away, would they think it was me. Because they never thought I was there to begin with. And as I sat there, late into the night, watching the blinking cursor on the confirmation screens, I realized something else, something big. I didn't feel guilty. Not even a little. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't covering for them. I wasn't shielding them from consequences. I was letting them live in the world they insisted they were in all along. One where Rachel doesn't matter. One where Rachel doesn't carry anyone. Well, good luck with that. It didn't take long, barely 2 weeks, before the first cracks began to show, and like every structure built on assumption and entitlement, the moment a single pillar was removed, the whole thing started to sway, then buckle, then collapse under its own weight. Though none of them realized what was happening, at least not at first, because when you've grown used to things being done for you without asking, you never stop to consider how they're getting done in the first place. I didn't expect fireworks or chaos on day one. What I expected, and got, was the slow burn, the kind of unraveling that reveals just how fragile things always were underneath the surface, only now without me there to catch the slack. The first call came on a Thursday evening, just after dinner. It was Mom. She didn't leave a message, which was already out of character, because she was the kind of woman who left full voicemail novels even when she only meant to say, "Call me back." The second call came less than an hour later, then a text. "Hey sweetie, did you change something with the insurance? Dad says the premium wasn't deducted." I read it while eating leftover pasta and watching reruns of a show I didn't even like, and for a second, I felt the reflex kick in, that automatic muscle memory that said fix it, solve it, cover it before it becomes a problem. But I didn't. I stared at the screen, let the bubble of anxiety rise to the top of my throat, and then, without responding, I flipped my phone over and let the silence do the talking. By the weekend, things were escalating. Lindsay called twice, and when I didn't answer, she sent a voice message with that tone she uses when she wants to sound sweet but is really seething beneath it, asking if I had somehow messed with the Wi-Fi setup, because her kids couldn't connect when they came over to visit their grandparents. Apparently, the service had been suspended for non-payment, which is a technical way of saying I stopped keeping the circus running and the monkeys were confused why the music stopped. Still, I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I had spent the better part of the last decade answering calls that weren't mine to take, solving issues that weren't mine to solve, playing mediator in conflicts I didn't create, and showing up emotionally, financially, and logistically for people who had already made it very clear I was expendable the moment I stopped being useful. Let them sit in the discomfort for once. Let them feel the weight of what I'd been lifting. By the second week of January, the voicemails started getting longer and less polite. Don finally called, just once, but he didn't even try to ease into it. No greeting, no pretense of concern, just his voice, short, clipped, irritated, saying, "I don't know what you did, but your mother's prescription got denied and she's panicking, so if this is some kind of payback stunt, you better grow up and fix it." I played it back 3 times, not because I couldn't believe it, but because I needed to hear the sheer gall in his voice again, that familiar undertone of authority and blame wrapped into one. He genuinely believed I had no right to stop providing, even after being told, on Christmas night, no less, that I was nothing more than a weight to be carried. That was when I started writing it down. Every call, every message, every sudden realization they had about how much I'd been doing. Not for legal reasons, though I wouldn't put it past Don to try something dramatic if his pride got bruised hard enough, but just for myself. For the record. So I could look at it and remind myself that this wasn't revenge. This was truth surfacing after years of being buried under false gratitude and selective memory. They had called me a burden. They had made me feel like I was taking and taking, when in reality, I had been bleeding out for them quietly, patching holes in their lives while they sailed on, blind to the storm I was keeping at bay. And now the water was rising, and all they could do was scream into the void, wondering why the lifeboat wasn't there anymore. What struck me most wasn't their desperation, it was how unprepared they were for basic adulthood. These weren't senile old folks or helpless children. Don was 68, sharp as ever, and proud of claiming he never needed anyone. Mom, while a little softer in the mind these days, was still fully capable of navigating her own affairs if she chose to. But they hadn't had to. Because I was the one who remembered the passwords, who read the small print, who knew the billing cycles and the grace periods and the late fees before they hit. I had created a system so seamless they forgot it even existed, and now that the scaffolding was gone, they were standing in midair, blinking into the sun like moles ripped from underground. Lindsay, to her credit, tried a different tactic. She sent a voice message one night around midnight, pretending to be calm, pretending to be the voice of reason. "Look," she said, "I don't know what's going on with you, but the house is a mess and Dad's freaking out, and if this is about what he said at Christmas, maybe you should just come over and talk to them. You're being a little dramatic, don't you think?" That word, dramatic, landed like a punch. It always did, because it was the word they'd thrown at me my entire life anytime I dared to express emotion or set a boundary. It was their weapon, their way of keeping me in line. Make her feel like she's overreacting and she'll back down. But not this time. Because here's the thing, I wasn't being dramatic. I was being absent. And for people who had grown addicted to my presence, my absence was starting to feel like punishment, even though it was really just the long overdue end of my unpaid labor. I didn't call back. I didn't write back. I didn't explain. I let the phones ring. I let the notifications pile up. And as I watched their carefully maintained illusion begin to disintegrate one bill, one service, one missed deadline at a time, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you finally let people experience the chaos they kept pretending you didn't hold back. And maybe they'll figure it out. Maybe Don will get online and sort through the accounts himself. Maybe Lindsay will come over and help them set up new payments. Or maybe they'll sit there, week after week, wondering who let the world fall apart, never once thinking to look at the empty chair at the dinner table and realize she was never the burden. She was the backbone. And now she's gone. By the time the 3rd week rolled around, it was no longer confusion or mild frustration I heard in their voices. It had evolved into full-blown panic, a kind of desperate, Scrambling energy that only exists in people who've built their lives on assumptions so sturdy, they never stopped to imagine what would happen if the foundation was pulled out from under them. And what made it all the more twisted, all the more satisfying in the most quietly devastating way, was that they still hadn't figured it out. They still hadn't made the connection between the vanishing financial safety net and the daughter they'd treated like emotional lint on the sleeve of their perfect little family image. I got the email first. It came from Lindsay, who, true to form, still managed to sound like she was doing me a favor even in the middle of a crisis. The subject line was, "Can we talk, please?" And the body was short, suspiciously polite, and laced with just enough guilt to make me smile despite myself. "I know things got heated at Christmas, and I know you've been going through a lot. But Mom's having a really hard time and Dad's health isn't great, and I think it's time we stop the drama and work things out like adults. If you could call me, I'd appreciate it. They really need your help." Not, "We miss you." Not, "We're sorry." Not even the bare minimum acknowledgement that what happened on Christmas wasn't just a misunderstanding or a moment of heat, but a culmination of years of silent disrespect. Just a thinly veiled plea, disguised as maturity, asking me to come back, not as a daughter or a sister, but as the manager, the operator, the invisible technician who'd always known where the fuse box was. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because I already knew exactly what was going on. They were unraveling, but they were still too proud, or maybe too blind, to admit they had been leaning on me more than they ever realized. They thought they were rescuing me by letting me stay with them all those years ago, but what they never saw, or never chose to see, was how quickly the roles had reversed. I was the one keeping the household functioning. I was the one who made sure Dawn's truck insurance never lapsed, who reminded Mom to refill her pills, who covered the difference when the heating bill spiked and they couldn't swing it on Dawn's fixed income. I was the adult, and they were just passengers pretending to drive. And yet, even now, when the walls were cracking and the bills were overdue and the alarms on their phones were going off without understanding what they were for, they still couldn't bring themselves to say it out loud. Instead, they tried to shift the narrative, to turn this into an emotional standoff where I was being petty, I was being childish, I was the one with the problem. That's the part that always burns the most, not the lack of gratitude, not even the disrespect, but the gaslighting, the rewriting of history in real time. As if they could just speak a new version of events into existence, and hope I'd be foolish enough to go along with it again. Then came the second email, and this one was different. This one came directly from Dawn. No subject line. No salutation. Just a single block of text that made my stomach twist, not because it hurt, but because of how perfectly it captured the delusion he had been living in for decades. "I don't know what you think you're accomplishing with all this silence," he wrote. "You're hurting your mother, and, honestly, you're embarrassing yourself. We've always been there for you, and this is how you repay us? Over one stupid comment? Grow up, Rachel. You're not a victim here. You were given more chances than most. We expected better." I read it twice, not to understand it better, but to fully absorb the gall it took to send something so devoid of reflection, so steeped in the kind of arrogant certainty that only comes from years of unchecked ego. He wasn't asking me to come back. He was demanding it. He was insisting on my return to my unpaid post, to resume my duties like nothing had happened, and to do so without question or resentment, because in his world, I wasn't a person with boundaries. I was a resource, a fixture, a reliable fallback plan who had dared, for the first time, to remove herself from the equation. It was almost funny if it hadn't been so sad. Because in that email, in that tone of disgust and disappointment, was the purest confession he could have made. He needed me. He needed the daughter he belittled. He needed the woman he had once told to stop freeloading and pull her weight, even though it had been my weight that kept the roof from collapsing. And now that I was gone, now that I'd done the unthinkable and stepped away without apology, they were flailing, trying to cast me as the villain in a story they didn't even understand the plot of. But what they hadn't realized, and what I was only now fully beginning to understand myself, was that the longer I stayed silent, the clearer everything became. The power I had given them by being constantly available, constantly giving, constantly rescuing, was mine to take back. And now that I wasn't going to return it out of guilt or fear or some twisted sense of familial duty. There's something almost poetic about watching people flounder in the wake of their own ignorance. Not because you wish them harm, but because it forces them to finally see the invisible scaffolding they've always leaned on. They think the walls are cracking because life is unfair. But really, they're just seeing what life looks like without the daughter they spent years pretending was in the way. And maybe Lindsay would step in now. Maybe she'd get her hands dirty for once, learn how to manage a household instead of just dressing it up for photo ops. Maybe Dawn would finally face the reality of what aging looks like when you burn bridges with the only person who ever paid attention. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd just keep stumbling, angry and confused, looking for someone else to blame. But either way, I was done being the one who fixed it. Done being the one who turned chaos into order, all while being told I was lucky just to be in the room. This was the part where they were supposed to wake up and realize how much they had lost. But I had a feeling they'd cling to denial just a little longer. Which was fine by me. Because the real reckoning hadn't even started yet. There's a specific kind of silence that falls over your life when you finally, truly walk away from people who believed you'd never leave, an eerie, hollow stillness that doesn't feel peaceful at first, but more like the quiet aftermath of a long and exhausting storm, where everything is still wet and broken, and you're just standing there, soaked to the bone, wondering how you survived the chaos you called normal for so long. That's what the first full month without contact felt like. Not freedom. Not vindication. But numbness, the kind that seeps in slowly and doesn't go away just because you've made the right decision. People love to romanticize the idea of cutting ties, of reclaiming your worth and disappearing from the lives of those who took you for granted, but what they don't talk about is the part where you're sitting in your kitchen at midnight, staring at your phone lighting up for the 10th time that day, and you still have to fight the instinct to pick it up because somewhere deep in your bones, a part of you still wants to be needed. It was a Thursday when Don left the voicemail that made me realize the tide had fully turned. His voice, which had always carried that familiar weight of control, of mock authority rooted in decades of unchallenged dominance, now sounded different, hollow, strained, and, if I wasn't mistaken, scared. He didn't yell this time. He didn't scold or accuse or even ask me to fix anything. He just said, "We need to talk, Rachel. I'm not proud of how things went. Your mother's not doing well. I don't know what to do." And then he hung up. No bravado, no denial, just a man standing in the ruins of a house he built on the lie that strength means never needing help. I sat there with the phone in my lap, the glow of the screen casting long shadows across the floor, and I didn't move. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I didn't feel anything dramatic. I just let the weight of his words settle over me like dust, not heavy, but present. For the first time in my life, Don had said something close to an admission. Not quite an apology, but the kind of statement a man like him makes when he's exhausted every other option and has nowhere left to turn. And that's when I knew I had won, not in the petty, triumphant way people talk about in revenge fantasies, but in the quiet, deeply sobering sense that I had finally shifted the balance of power in a family that had always demanded everything from me and returned so little in kind. They weren't calling because they wanted me back in their lives out of love. They were calling because they had realized just how much of their lives I had been holding together. And now, with their systems failing, their routines crumbling, and their illusion of control completely shattered, they were facing a truth they had spent years refusing to look at, that the daughter they treated like a footnote was actually the one writing the whole damn script. The voicemails didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied. Mom started calling, too, not often, but just enough for me to hear the tremble in her voice, that soft fragility she used to bury under pot roasts and holiday traditions, and carefully timed smiles at family dinners. She left messages like little ghosts, floating into my inbox and vanishing without response. "I miss you, baby," she said in one. "I don't understand what's happening, but we love you." That one stung more than the others, not because it changed anything, but because it reminded me of all the ways she'd allowed herself to disappear into Dawn's shadow, all the times she'd chosen peace over truth, silence over protection. And let me take the hits just to avoid a raised voice from the man sitting across the table. There was a part of me small, buried, but persistent, that wanted to go back. Not to stay, not to fix, but just to witness it. To stand in the middle of that house and see the aftermath with my own eyes. To look Don in the face and ask him, so who's carrying who now? But I didn't. I knew that kind of closure was a myth, the kind of thing people write into movies and books to give the audience a neat little bow at the end. Real life doesn't come with neat endings. Real life leaves things hanging, leaves phone calls unanswered and people waiting by doors that never open again. So instead, I watched from afar. I kept an eye on the accounts, not to interfere, but out of morbid curiosity. I saw the missed payments rack up. I saw the gas get shut off. I saw the prescription lapse, the credit cards hit their limits, and the overdrafts stack up until even the most basic services started slipping through their fingers. I imagined Don calling customer service, confused and angry, listening to hold music while realizing he didn't even know the answers to his own security questions. I imagined Lindsay cursing under her breath as she waited in line at the pharmacy, trying to explain why Mom's medication hadn't been filled in over a month. And through it all, I kept my distance, not because I didn't care, but because caring had always been the currency they spent without ever offering anything in return. And maybe that makes me cold. Maybe it makes me bitter. Maybe someone watching this right now is thinking, well, I could never do that to my family, and to those people I say this. You don't know what you're capable of until you've been used so long you start to disappear inside yourself. You don't know what you'll walk away from until the moment comes when walking away is the only way to survive with any part of your dignity intact. And when that moment comes, when someone who claims to love you looks you in the eye and tells you that you're a burden, you realize the real betrayal isn't in walking away. It's in staying. So no, I didn't pick up the phone. I didn't drive back. I didn't show up to save the day. Because the truth is, they weren't calling me to reconnect. They were calling to resurrect the old system, the one where I did all the work and they got to feel superior. And I'm not stepping back into that. Not now. Not ever. Let them figure it out. Let them ask each other the hard questions. Let them dig through old paperwork, reset passwords, make uncomfortable phone calls, and sit with the silence that comes when the fixer walks away. Because they need that silence. They need that discomfort. They need that echoing, painful space where my voice used to be. As for me, I'm building something else now. Something quieter, smaller, but real. Something that doesn't require me to be invisible to be loved. And maybe one day, they'll understand that. Or maybe they won't. Either way, I'm not answering the damn phone.